Good morning, everybody. My name is David Sandalow. I'm the inaugural fellow here at the Center on Global Energy Policy, and we are thrilled to welcome back to Columbia John Elkind, who has a degree in Soviet history from Columbia, has gone on to many great things from that, and he's going to talk today about post-Paris collaborations on clean energy. I'm here with our founding director, Jason Bordoff, Center on Global Energy Policy, and we run a steady series of events on energy topics. We welcome all of you, and we welcome everybody watching online. John's going to talk for a while about this topic, then I'm going to ask him some questions, and then we're going to throw it open to all of you. For those of you listening online, you can ask questions at hashtag CGEP events. That's Center on Global Energy Policy, CGEP-events. And also follow us on our Twitter handle at Columbia U Energy. Some program notes. We have a couple of events coming up in the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow we have a program on global voices on climate change and the Paris Agreement at 11 o'clock in IAB 1501. We have Dr. Tani Al-Ziaudi, the special envoy from the United Arab Emirates, Adnan Amin, the executive director of the International Renewable Energy Agency, and Delphine Arroud, a top diplomat from the French Foreign Ministry, all coming to talk about climate change, along with our own non-resident fellow, Joe Aldi, the Center on Global Energy Policy. So that's 11 o'clock on tomorrow. We have a program on April 21st at 12:15 on renewable energy with Stephen Crowley, the General Counsel of the U.S. Department of Energy. And then next week, Wednesday, April 27th, our Global Energy Summit in Low Library from 1 to 5 p.m. So we welcome everybody. John Elkind, it's really fun for me to introduce John. Not only is he a distinguished graduate of Columbia, he and I have crossed paths a number of times in the U.S. government. John worked in the White House on the staff of the National Security Council, where I got to observe the confidence that the Vice President and President of the United States had directly in John and his work. John was then at Brookings. John has then been at the U.S. Department of Energy in the Obama administration, where he now serves as the Assistant Secretary for International Affairs with responsibility for just the whole world and its energy relations. And so we are really thrilled to welcome John Elkind to Columbia.
Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be back at Columbia, and a pleasure to be with you today. I think many people looked at the conclusion of the Conference of the Parties in Paris in December with the same question that was in their minds, and there was then a very active debate as to whether the climate agreement that was reached in Paris represented a failure to deliver on solutions, all of the solutions that are needed in our global effort to respond to climate change, or whether the COP21 outcomes instead represented the establishment of a strong framework within which to move forward, adapting over time the specifics of what was agreed to what the circumstances show themselves to be as we go on. And my presentation today is going to focus on a number of specific engagements that we are undertaking in that very framework of trying to figure out, trying to make sure that the framework that was set in place by Paris is used to the utmost, used to the greatest beneficial impact in helping to accelerate the clean energy transition that we now need to be pursuing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the agreement itself, talk then about some of our key collaborations with a small handful of international partners, and you will all appreciate the peril that is implied in picking out a handful, because that means lots of other very important partners. I will not mention, it doesn't mean that we, in some or in any way, don't see them as being important partners. But then third, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about these kind of two key collaborations that we have underway, the Clean Energy Ministerial and a new undertaking that was inaugurated at the time of actually the first day of the COP in Paris, that focuses on over-the-horizon technologies, clean energy technologies. It's called Mission Innovation. So first, just to talk a little bit about the COP. I believe that many of the following remarks will be familiar to the group, but I think that it is useful in terms of level setting to review that the structure that was agreed in Paris is a combination of features which are obligatory on participating countries, namely the development of individual programs for response to climate, and collaborations, for example, on the stock taking that will occur on a 5-year cycle, first beginning in 2023. Countries, though, had the flexibility to bring to the table their intended nationally determined contributions, the INDCs, which will morph into NDCs, no longer intended, but actually confirmed. And it's worth remembering, and this goes to the context of the program notes that David spoke about a moment ago, that this is a very important week in this follow-up to Paris, inasmuch as the agreement will be opened for signature on Friday, on Earth Day, here in New York. The entry into force trigger is a minimum of 55 countries representing 55% of global emissions. So the agreement itself, although concluded in December, hasn't taken force yet, but we hope will do so soon. And so where does that take us? Now, this is going to be a graphic which is, I think, very difficult to read in this room, or to decipher in this room. So maybe the most important thing that I can do is call your attention to the footnote there, which notes that this is from the UNFCCC Secretariat's report that is entitled Synthesis Report on the Aggregate Effect of the INDCs. And broadly speaking, this graphic depicts the trajectory along the business as usual trajectory along which we have been moving, and then identifies, oh boy, problem with the colorblind guy, the two blocks in the upper middle of the, are they yellow or are they green? The two blocks that identify the projected impacts of the INDCs in 2025 and in 2030, and you'll see there's a kind of a central case that is represented by the dotted lines within those boxes, the yellow boxes. But then the curves below that show the steepness of the curve, and implied in that also, or related to that also, is a assessed probability of success in putting in place the required measures that would keep climate change in aggregate to below 2 degrees Celsius by mid-century. And the punchline is quite simple. The INDCs that are on the table today, though they represent a decent start, they are by no means sufficient to take us to where we need to go if our objective is change less than 2 degrees Celsius. And that thought is itself incumbent on the idea of full implementation of the INDCs that are on the table. And so you will, from that, understand the context, the complexity within which we are working. Let me talk a little bit about some of our engagements with some of the key partners and what their elements are in their INDCs. I'm just going to do 3, China, India, and Mexico. And again, I don't by implication wish to suggest that other countries are less significant, but noting the scale of China's emissions, so 11 gigatons of carbon equivalent per year, you can see in the upper right the breakdown in terms of the various climate forcing gases, the circle on the left, the sectoral breakdowns, the circle on the right, and this is drawn from data from the World Resources Institute. Against that backdrop, what is it that China has indicated that it will do? Well, this has been a very, very important and dynamic story over the last couple of years, and I would assert, you may disagree, that some of the most important progress that was achieved in the last couple of years leading into the Paris climate meeting were the two agreements reached by the presidents of the United States and China to intensify collaborations in the clean energy space. China announced in November of 14 that it would seek to peak its carbon emissions by 2030, and ideally before 2030, that it would significantly increase the carbon dioxide productivity, if you want to put it that way, reduce its emissions intensity of CO2 per unit of GDP, and that, and this is the element of scale that is truly astounding, that it would increase its non-fossil share of its total energy mix to 20% by 2030. So the scale of that change alone dwarfs basically everything else that is happening around the globe in the non-fossil energy space. In relation to that, we have a series of engagements, bilateral engagements and multilateral engagements that focus on a wide range of topics, from carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, to buildings energy efficiency, to energy efficiency of heavy-duty vehicles, to collaborations on renewable energy, and also to the Clean Energy Ministerial that I'll be talking about presently. If we shift to India, you'll notice that the scale of the emissions, China, in the case of China, it was 11 gigatons of carbon equivalent per year. Here, India 3. India has a significantly more conditional quality to its INDC, which assumes the provision of external resources to help India to make that shift. But separate and apart from its INDC, its climate-related goals, India, which continues, understandably, to highlight the importance of its development imperative, it has a very ambitious pair of goals for 60 gigawatts of wind and 100 gigawatts of solar by 2022, which, let's review, is just around the corner when one is talking about major investment programs such as that. Again with China, I keep saying China, India. With India, we have a series of bilateral engagements. We look at resource maps in the solar space. We look at means to encourage the development of building codes that favor energy conservation. We look at collaborations increasingly to provide alternatives to some of the very significant climate-forcing agents that are used for refrigerants, like the hydrofluorocarbons. So what are the technical alternatives, either as different refrigerant fluids or entirely different approaches to heating and cooling for populations around the world that live where there are high ambient temperatures. Finally, let me just highlight our work with Mexico. Many of you will, I suspect, be aware that Mexico over the last 5 years has undertaken an enormous historic reform of its energy system to enable activities, investments, different market structures, different business models, which until this reform were entirely out of reach for Mexico. It has been therefore one of the most vibrant parts of the global energy scene, and we at the Department of Energy have worked very, very closely with the Mexicans, supporting their efforts, helping them to think through what is the range of tools that they may use in order to pull more clean energy into their fuel mix, to develop their grids, and to help their investment environment be more attractive to external investors and internal investors, Mexican investors. Now, inasmuch as we share a border with Mexico and have a number of interconnections between our energy systems, whether one is talking about natural gas exports to Mexico, power being traded back and forth across the U.S.-Mexico border, we have also engaged with our Mexican colleagues on a U.S.-focused planning process called the Quadrennial Energy Review. The first of the QER installments was released roughly a year ago and focused on the transmission, storage, and distribution segments of our energy infrastructures. The second installment of the QER that is now being developed focuses end-to-end on our electricity system from generation through end use. And again, because of both the existing interconnections across our borders with Mexico and much more so Canada, but also because of the opportunities for further mutually beneficial engagements, we are working with our partners on both the north and southern borders. So having highlighted these three as examples of, first of all, the difference in the makeup of the emissions, both by gases and by sectors, but then also the range of different kinds of mostly bilateral engagements that we have with these partners, I want to talk a little bit about these two kind of signal multilateral, plurilateral engagements that we are undertaking at present. The first goes actually back to David Sandalow's time at the Department of Energy, at which point he was the motive force behind the establishment of the Clean Energy Ministerial. It's a collaboration that grew to include 23 countries and the European Union. Interestingly, one of the most recent country to join this collaboration is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, not a country that people in the climate and clean energy space typically associate with the clean energy developments, but they've been a very interesting partner, and I'm happy to talk more about that in Q&A. It's 90% of global energy investment that is represented here, about north of 75% of global CO2 emissions, and we focus in basically four areas. One that looks at energy, a suite of energy demand issues, and that focuses in particular on demand-side reductions. Arguably, this has been the most active piece of our collaboration. A second at the far right that looks at clean energy supply, and you'll see collaborations there on solar and wind, bio, hydropower. The systems and integration column that appears between the two has also been a very exciting piece of the work that we've done together, looking, for example, under the 21st Century Power Partnership at the challenges and opportunities that exist for utility companies and their customers around the globe as they try to figure out how to maximize the share of clean energy in their grids, including variable renewables, and what both technical and economic and business model implications do those transitions have for the nature of the power sector. Last, the fourth of the areas that we broadly focus on under the Clean Energy Ministerial is a cross-cutting one that looks at two elements of capacity. One is the role of women in clean energy, the Clean Energy Empowerment and Education C3E initiative that's on the bottom left, and the other is the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Now, the Women in Clean Energy focus stems from the basic reality that if we are going to succeed in dealing in a timely manner with the climate change problem, we're not going to be able to do that with half of humanity. We need all of the best minds engaged on this, and there'll be a big conference hosted by Stanford University in our major meetings at the end of May and June that will drill into this more. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is a capacity building engagement that is available to all countries around the world, policymakers that are looking at basic, basic and advanced choices about how to deploy clean energy across their economies. Excuse me, I can tell you more about that in the Q&A. I will, in the interest of trying to speed up, give just a couple of examples on the some of the results that we've been able to realize. But these slides will be available for you after the presentation, and I'm more than happy to elaborate on anything that I kind of march past too fast right now. I mentioned that the energy efficiency arena has probably been the most active element of SEM, and we've engaged in an effort to try to quantify. Of course, attribution is always a very tricky issue, to try to quantify the impacts of our SEED initiative. SEED stands for Super Efficient Equipment and Appliance Deployment. We estimate that the quality and performance standards, as one example, that have been enabled in the LED space could save as much as 277 terawatt hours of electricity and avoid 254 million metric tons of carbon. That's a cumulative projection to 2030. But you'll see that we translate that into a kind of medium size subcritical coal plant, and it's not a trivial impact. 90 avoided coal-fired power plants, we estimate. The Clean Energy Solutions Center has been used by north of 180 different requests from something like 90 different countries around the globe, so not just the SEM partners, but others as well. We have focused on electric vehicles and the interest of one of our key SEM partners, India, in taking advantage of the electric vehicle initiative to accelerate its developments has been a very interesting part of the story. Our last meeting took place in Mérida, Mexico in May of last year, and we started a second phase in the work of the Clean Energy Ministerial. That was the 6th in the annual series of ministerial meetings. And those ministerial meetings, the cabinet level engagements, are complemented by ongoing technical work that happens in each of the initiatives that I mentioned previously. But in an effort to try to kind of accentuate the visibility and therefore the impact of the Clean Energy Ministerial, we started this new phase where we identify in each round 3 major, or 2 or 3 major so-called campaigns to focus on. The Global Lighting Challenge, to give you one example, is a race of sorts to reach 10 billion LEDs deployed globally among the SEM countries. And so that's just one of the examples. We also identified who the hosts would be for both the 7th ministerial meeting, which takes place on the 1st and 2nd of June in San Francisco, and then the 8th. You'll see on the left-hand side President Obama by video link informing the ministers and other delegations in Mérida that the United States would host in this June. And in the lower right, you see the Chinese Minister of Science and Technology, Dr. Wang Gong, informing the group that China would host in 2017, the 8th in the ministerial series. I won't dwell long on the planning for the June meeting. I will simply say that it should surprise nobody that the Bay Area, with its very, very heavy representation of clean energy research institutions, universities, national labs, companies ranging from the startups to the big boys and girls, provides a really exciting venue in which to host this meeting that we'll be doing in 6 weeks' time. We'll also have a technology showcase that will focus on products and also research from all of the SEM countries. Some of the key steps forward that are occurring in the 7 categories that you see on that slide, in an effort to try to make more tactile, more understandable to the lay public, what does the clean energy revolution look like and what could it consist of? Last but not least, I will not dwell here. We have at each one of the SEM ministerial meetings a combination of deep dives on particular topics that involve both governmental and private sector representatives, and here is information on the roundtables that will occur in June. The other piece of the picture that I want to tell you about is mission innovation. Now, to give you an oversimplified distinction, the Clean Energy Ministerial's emphasis is on deployment now of technologies that are available in the marketplace now. Mission innovation responds instead to some of the challenges that we will still experience in order to reach the deep decarbonization that we must get to in order to adhere to that 2 degrees Celsius limitation. Mission innovation is focused on understanding and helping to move the frontier forward on what are the technologies that we will need starting in the 2025, 2030 timeframe and on to mid-century. This photo is from the launch event that took place on the 30th of November in Paris. There were 20 countries represented, many of them at the head of state or government level, obviously President Obama presiding from the United States. These countries all agreed to the goal of doubling our clean energy, each of those countries' clean energy research and development governmental budgets in the next 5 years. And importantly, this effort to enrich the R&D pipeline is complemented by a link to a grouping called the Breakthrough Energy Coalition that I'll talk about in a second. Just a word more about the mission innovation countries. They too represent the predominant share of investment and emissions. So if one works from the premise that we need to be addressing the problems that are created by the current versions of our economies, then we've got, I would say, most if not all of the right partners in the room. The problem is not just can one develop new technologies and can one do so at scale and at tempo sufficient to enable a deep decarbonization by mid-century. The further problem is how to pull technologies out of the lab setting and into the commercial marketplace. You all will have heard about the various valleys of death. They are depicted here in this slide. For example, those between the initial research and pilot phase, and different scales of investment are needed. Also then between pilot and full-scale market opportunity, you end up with a drop-off in available funding for research and commercialization and commercial scale-up. So this grouping of 27 investors plus the University of California stepped forward under leadership provided by Bill Gates as a self-identified group of major investors, deep-pocketed investors who declared their willingness to invest early and for the long term. Now, this is not the unique listing of investors of that sort that exist across the world, but their willingness to self-identify and to come forward signaling the interest of commercial investors, we felt was a very important feature. I will stop here with this as a last attempt to kind of, again, draw out the distinction between what we're doing in the Clean Energy Ministerial, that's the right-hand side, where the emphasis is on deployment now of those technologies, policies, et cetera, that are available. And you see some examples below deployment now of the kinds of engagements that are the topic of our work under the Clean Energy Ministerial, as opposed to mission innovation on the left, where the emphasis is on future innovations and, most importantly, on cost reduction. Because our success in having technologies that actually do move into the marketplace will be driven exceptionally strongly by whether we succeed in reducing cost as we deploy, as we further develop the technologies. So I will stop there and apologize for going a little long, but I would be very happy to take questions. How do you want to do this?
Sure. Thank you. Want to take a seat somewhere?
Sure.
Thank you, John. That was tremendous. Thank you for all your work on these incredibly important issues. Thought maybe we just start. I'll ask some questions and then throw it open to all of you. Maybe start by focusing on some of the countries that you talked about at the beginning and maybe some others. I know from talking to you, you're just back from China, which you mentioned. Any insights from your trip to China about the progress of clean energy and the transition happening there?
Well, again, one of the most stunning things that is intimately well known to you, David, is the scale and the tempo at which China operates. China is an economy whose energy sector is dominated by coal today, and you see that both in statistics and in air quality issues in most major metropolitan areas in China. But the scale of ambition for changing that and how fast is breathtaking, and I think is really laudable, and is a story that will be one of the most exciting things that we all watch over the coming, I would say, decade or so. There are lots of different views. There's no great monolith of policy or technology wisdom, again, as you know so well. One of the most interesting experiences that I had last week was having discussions in the city of Shenzhen with both practitioners and policymakers who are involved in the Shenzhen pilot program for CO2 emissions trading. This is one of 7 pilots that exist across China. The president of China has enunciated the goal by the end of next year, 2017, to create a nationwide emissions trading system, which is, again, scale and tempo are breathtaking. But one of the most interesting features about the way that the officials and practitioners in Shenzhen talk about their pilot is that they talk about it from the perspective of a competitiveness play, an economic competitiveness play, saying that the effect of the emissions trading scheme that is being instituted in Shenzhen would be to provide impetus for the companies in that major metropolitan area to invest and modernize, and therefore position themselves more advantageously going forward.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia briefly in your remarks, and it's quite interesting comment. One doesn't usually think about Saudi Arabia in connection with clean energy. What's happening on the clean energy issue in the kingdom today? It's particularly timely since President Obama is maybe on his way to Saudi Arabia right now. I think he'll be there this week.
Well, obviously, Saudi Arabia remains a country whose economy depends fundamentally on hydrocarbons. But the petroleum minister, Ali Al-Naimi, has pointed out, including to our former boss, Steve Chu, that there are 3 things that exist in abundance in the kingdom. One is oil, the second is sun, and the third is sand. And you can do something with the last 2 if you put them together. So there's a great deal of ambition in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to understand what is their broader role in the energy sector going forward. There's heavy investment that is going on in the solar energy space. There are plans under development, prospects a little less clear in the nuclear space. And very interestingly, there is a big push that is underway in relation to energy efficiency. So those of the audience who have followed this story will realize that with the very high temperatures in the kingdom in summertime, one of the increasing aspects of their total load has been direct crude burn in the summertime for electricity generation in order to enable air conditioning. And that space cooling demand has been huge, and they haven't previously had in place performance standards for any of the building products, the cooling systems, et cetera. So in the last 5 years, the Saudi government has instituted a new Saudi energy efficiency program, and it's a very, very exciting, very dynamic, and very serious undertaking. Now, they are very candid to acknowledge that it is not a program that depends first and foremost on elevation in price. But this is something that they're quite direct about, and the standards work itself can have a very important early impact, and it appears to be doing so.
I know you travel all over the world, and I wonder, in your travels, have you gone to other places where you've kind of found a focus from the government on clean energy that might be surprising to people, countries where people might not normally think of a focus on clean energy?
Well, lots of them, and one of the beneficial impacts about the obligation to lay out intended nationally determined contributions for the climate agreement has been that all participating countries then have had to go through and consider what kind of tools might exist in the toolkit and what do you reach for in order to move forward on clean energy. But two that I would highlight that are very exciting places to look at. One I mentioned already, Mexico. Another that is frankly an even more complicated setting is Indonesia, where the aspiration to move away from coal-fired power, and particularly subcritical coal plants, is very, very high. You then layer that on top of the policy challenge of a country with 17,000 islands and populations that range from megacities to very rural, faraway village settings. And executing against that ambition in that setting is going to be a huge task. But it's one that the government of President Jokowi indicate an interest to pursue.
A few more questions that I want to bring members of the audience in. I know you speak Russian and have a lot of expertise in Russian affairs. Maybe just to broaden out from clean energy, just any thoughts about what's happening in Russia today and the impact of low oil prices in Russia and the Russian energy economy?
Well, the impact of low oil prices in Russia has been a challenge for policymakers and government officials. Russia, of course, is not the only place where that has been a fair statement. There are parts of our own economy that have been hit very heavily by the drop in prices. By the same token, there are parts of all economies where the drop in prices has amounted to a household windfall. So, one needs to keep the context there. All countries, and if you look at the U.S. case, all parts of countries are well advised to think about highly diversified economies to the greatest possible extent, so that one is not reliant in a kind of monoculture fashion. And this is a challenge that I think is one that decision makers and people and companies are facing in the Russian Federation today.
And then just on, maybe if you could just say a word about what the U.S. Department of Energy does with respect to clean energy technologies in this area, and I think some of our audience may not be familiar with that.
Well, DOE is institutionally an odd duck, as you know. If you look at energy ministries across the globe, many of them are the people that keep the lights on specifically, or that set the rules of the market in a very, very direct way. In the energy space, the U.S. Department of Energy plays a very different role. Now, I glide past the point that there are several power marketing administrations that are wholesale electricity systems, most of them in the west of the United States, that are under the administrative authority of the Department of Energy. But for the most part, our role at the Department of Energy when it comes to clean energy is in helping to move the frontier forward. We do that in a variety of different programs. For example, one of the ones that has gained visibility in the last couple of years has been the so-called ARPA-E program. It was first suggested in the mid-2000s, the first decade of this century, that is, and was initiated under the Obama administration. ARPA-E stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy. And so the intention is to provide partial funding that is available to researchers that have ideas that are potentially game-changing, but that frankly have a high risk of failure. So it's cost-shared funding that can be made available in order to bring forward things like new forms of wind turbines, large-scale battery storage systems, new materials that can have application in a whole slew of different energy systems going forward. So that's an example of many others. Another that may be of interest to the audience is the Clean Energy Investment Center, which is an effort to try to make sure that there is a more fluid interrelation between the research and development that happens in the 17 national labs that are part of the Department of Energy, and then the private sector picking up on technologies, finding investors. There's an element of kind of dating service there, in order to make sure that the technologies don't simply exist in the lab, but then move into the commercial marketplace as well.
Terrific. All right, well, we have a microphone here. It would be great if you could come up and that way our audience who's listening on the web could hear as well. Please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Linda Kruger with the Nature Conservancy. I was wondering if you could comment briefly on the financing challenge around the sustainable energy transition, and particularly for developing countries. And do any of the DOE collaborative programs seek to address the need for finance?
So the need for finance, thank you for your question. The need for finance is an element in all across the clean energy space, be it in the United States or elsewhere. In that context, I should probably mention one other DOE program which is worthy of note, the loan guarantee program at DOE, which very few people are aware of, but that has been a huge undertaking, particularly in the last 6 to 7 years. A major injection of funding that came from the Recovery Act back in early 2009, and a function and an effect in the marketplace which does relate to the developing country space, so I am coming back to that. But if you look, for example, at utility-scale solar installations across the United States, there was no debt finance that was available in the marketplace in the kind of 2010, 2011 period. The loan guarantee program stepped in to provide surety to lenders. And essentially, the effect after the first 5 such projects that had support from DOE's loan guarantee program was to de-risk the technology. So the next, I think it's 18 or 19 utility-scale photovoltaic installations are happening with no government participation whatsoever, because the debt finance community now has a greater understanding of, you know, what is the degree of reliability and what are the terms under which this can operate, and what is my likelihood of success in repayment. So now shifting to the developing country setting, obviously every country has its own particularities about nature of the economy, nature of the interventions that are therefore possible or recommended. We engage on this topic constantly with our partners through structures like the Clean Energy Ministerial, where a dedicated element of that Clean Energy Solutions Center is a portal that looks at finance issues. We also engage with big bilateral partners like the Chinese, where there is a very, very strong green finance emphasis that is going on, and that frankly David could tell you a little bit about, having just participated in a meeting on that topic. So it's a constant element of our collaborations, but it's also one where the solution in any given setting strongly reflects the particularities of that country.
Thanks. For those listening on podcast, my name is David Sandalow. I'm the Inaugural Fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, and I'm here with John Elkind, the Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy. Sir.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the overview. My name is Vasily Ftenakis. I direct the Center for Life Cycle Analysis at Columbia University with a joint appointment at Brookhaven National Lab, having worked with the industry for all my career. So the industry outreach is an important, actually, a part of what we do. And I want to bring up something that you probably know, but I think it is actually synergistic to the agreements of the governments, that is agreements in the industry. At COP in Paris, there were a few presented. To my understanding, the only one on the water and energy nexus was the Global Clean Water Desalination Alliance. I am honored by being actually one of the few academics to be in the board of that. We just started it in November, launched in December, and it has been actually supported by the government of France and the government of the Emirates. Now, why I think that this is very important? Because if you don't have the industry together in agreement, it can be a lot of opposition at every federal actually initiative from the industry. And I think a case in point is the EPA's Clean Power Plant, that obviously, in my opinion, is a very, very positive actually plant, but it has been debated at the court and nothing is being happening. You want the industry to be there. And we have been trying always for voluntary agreements with the industry, proactive, really, initiatives from the industry. So that's why I think that these type of initiatives, like the Clean Water Desalination Alliance, they deserve a lot of support from the governments, and even the Saudis actually are supporting it. Because, as you said, the sun, the water, and actually the lack of water, which is typically the case for the areas where we need a lot more water. You have a lot of sun. So my basic question for DOE is that I haven't seen any really funding for R&D or R&D with the loan guarantee program, which is very, very, very important for the industry in the water desalination area. If perhaps you have any thoughts on that?
So this very important point that you make about the centrality of the nexus between energy and water, which you will, of course, keenly appreciate the fact that these linkages move in both directions. You need water in order to produce and convert energy in many different forms. You need energy in order to extract, purify, recycle, et cetera, water. That is a huge area of focus for Secretary Moniz, and I trust that you will have seen some of the impacts from that in your Brookhaven lab setting. It's a topic that we are increasingly engaging on with different partners around the globe in a variety of different ways. Secretary Moniz was in Israel 2 weeks ago. We initiated there some focus exactly on the desalination challenges and how to do that in the most energy efficient way. We've also engaged on that topic with Emirati and Saudi colleagues. We see a lot of importance in focusing on this question. We've also introduced it as one of the 5 now elements in the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center, which is a a virtual set of research relationships that focus in on key clean energy topics. So the topic itself is important, and the engagement of industry together with governmentally supported research and policymaking, I think, again, is very important. So your points are well taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the comments. I'm Jackson Ewing, Director of Sustainability at the Asia Society Policy Institute. You know, after years of friction and recriminalization, I think many of us were taken by surprise with the burgeoning U.S.-China climate partnership. I wondered if you might comment a bit about the processes leading up to that partnership within the DOE, as well as what you see as being some of the primary conditions that made the partnership possible and that are driving it forward now.
Thank you for your question. Look, my answer to you, and I don't mean to be facile, is, but it is a kind of a relevant framing point, is that we cannot get to the clean energy outcomes that we require unless both China and the United States are making progress in that context. Now, this is something that David Sandalow has spent most of his career focusing on and making that point, and I've spent a few years learning from him on that point, so I think I'm getting it slowly.
That's for sure.
But to your question on the processes, many Chinese officials are quick to point out that they still feel themselves to be focusing primarily on China's economic development. I will tell you that it gets increasingly difficult to see China as a developing country, but that is what China says its status still is, and certainly across that vast economy, there's a wide range of levels of economic development. What helped, given that that is the place where the conversation starts a lot, is that China started to recognize some of the very considerable implications that arise from kind of business as usual approaches to its energy development. Many of you will have heard about the so-called airpocalypse in early 2013 when the air pollution numbers in Beijing were just off the charts, and that, in the view of many people, crystallized, it's oversimplifying, I know, the sense that something needed to shift, policies needed to be reoriented. Now, not everything that you would do in the climate and clean energy space is necessarily good for criteria air pollutant considerations in the Chinese major cities, but a lot of it is. And that recognition has been the thing that really has driven a lot of the movement. So I am making the point fundamentally that a lot of the shift and the progress has been a reflection of China's own considerations about where its self-interest lies. And that, to me, is perfectly laudable and is something that creates an opening with which then we were able to work and to point out that we can do collaborations in this space, in this space, in this space, many of which I enumerated earlier, that can help you, China, to move toward what you've identified as your desired outcomes. So I'd leave it there.
I know China's chairing the G20 this year, and I know you've been involved in some of the G20 meetings. Do you think these clean energy issues are going to be part of the G20 dialogue?
There's no question. I was on Wednesday and Thursday also in Shenzhen. I was at the second of the preparatory meetings for the G20 Energy Ministers meeting, which will take place at the end of June. And very, very clearly, there's a big focus on the Chinese side on clean energy thematics.
Hi, my name is Nimrod. I work for SCAP, which is an early stage clean tech investment firm. I was wondering, could you please elaborate on mission innovation? Specifically, what stage of development of the companies do they invest in, and how do they choose the companies to invest in?
So first of all, thank you for your question. The Breakthrough Energy Coalition is a grouping, a self-created grouping of investors. And so I can tell you what they have told us, but really the real answer is, go to the participating investors with questions. And I don't wish to put words into their mouths that they're not. What they have represented to us is that they will be in the process of identifying technologies and companies in the mission innovation countries, the 20 countries that are participants, that are at early commercial or just pre-commercial stage, and I can't translate that into TRL numbers right here, right now. I don't even think that they've assessed that at this stage. They're standing up the first fund of what they say will be several funds. I think that their aspiration is to have that fund significantly invested by the end of this calendar year. And again, the parameters that were enumerated on my slide come from materials from the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, but again, I defer to them as private individuals and the one university system for how that gets translated into actual investment decisions.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Dan Svanar, a financial investor into various projects and companies. And question of mine is, through your experience with the Clean Energy Ministerial, I'd love to, I guess, two questions. Get your views within domestic policy on net metering as it pertains to sort of a subsidy for residential or other type of renewable energies on a distributed level, where it's going. And then if you've seen business plans put together for distributed generation wind. If not, why you think you haven't, and if you have, what do you see as sort of the risks and opportunities there? Thank you.
So look, I'm going to kind of have to punt on the second one because I'm not sure that I'm deep enough to be worth taking up the airtime on it. But on the first, we face a pile of different challenges as we navigate this transition to a clean energy economy. The net metering question is indicative of this broad scale of other challenges that we face. And one of the key challenges is how you bridge from legacy systems developed under certain market presumptions and structures to much more flexible, I presume, much more decentralized models for many electricity systems. And across the United States, in regulated utilities, there are going to be a pile of different dissimilar answers to that question. The unifying underlying struggle is to figure out how do you attach value to some of the services that many utility systems, maybe all utility systems, will need, including a grid that is ready to function on the day that you need it to do so, storage that doesn't get used for most parts of the year, and other such services. This is one of the core points that will be focused on in this second installment of the Quadrennial Energy Review that I referred to earlier. And by the way, it may be of interest to you or to others in the room that there is a series of public engagement sessions that are being conducted by the Department of Energy in preparation of that second piece of the Quadrennial Energy Review, and it might be of interest to you or others to consider participating in them. Thank you.
What is the U.S. Department of Energy doing on solar broadly?
Well, the engagements involve a lot of funding for research out of the solar program. David, you'll recall the so-called Sunshot program, the objective of which was to reach the threshold of $1 a watt installed capacity. One of the areas that is increasingly being focused on by our colleagues in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy is not the hardware technology costs, but the soft costs. And in the context of the United States, with a highly decentralized regulatory structure, what is it that the federal government can do, not to cause, but to facilitate or encourage the kinds of advances that would allow a significant reduction in the soft costs being the costs of permitting and regulation and other steps that you need to take if you are to actually not just purchase the solar panel, but actually get it installed and generating electricity for your home or for the grid, what have you. So it's a number, and that's not to say anything about some of the advanced material science work that is happening through ARPA-E, as a whole range of different engagements.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Isle. I'm an independent consultant formerly of the State Department's Climate Change Office. Thank you for coming today and for your remarks. I'd like to ask a follow-up question on your comments both about INDCs and about the Clean Energy Ministerial. As the Paris Agreement comes into force, could you elaborate a bit on how that may be driving the conversation and countries' motivations within the context of the Clean Energy Ministerial, both the member countries and perhaps other countries beyond?
Thank you. Great question. So, look, countries participating in the Paris Agreement that sign and that ultimately become parties once it enters into force have this obligation not only to generate the first INDC, but then through the stock-taking exercise, over time, one presumes to increase ambition in order, and I call the audience's attention to that initial slide, incomprehensible slide showing the graphic, to move us from outcomes that will track way too high for the 2 degrees Celsius outcome that we seek, and that pull us farther down the emissions levels toward an outcome more consistent with that objective. Now, why would countries get more ambitious over time? Because they get to a point of greater familiarity with the tools, the technologies, the policies, the structures that can enable them to reach more ambitious levels of emissions reduction. So what we're doing in the SEM, by focusing in on particular subsets of the clean energy space, is to help increase that sense of comfort that different countries have. And again, I stress, this is not a one-way kind of an exchange. It is very much 2 or 10 or whatever the right permutation or combination is of 23 countries plus the European Union. It is a very lively give and take where some of the, for example, to my comment a moment ago about soft costs, some of the comparisons that have arisen out of the wind and solar conversations in SEM have highlighted the degree to which Germany's situation and the United States are just worlds apart in that space, right? So that then sets minds to thinking about, in the United States, about what is it that we could do, again, consistent with our laws, structures, et cetera, to help facilitate progress in that arena. So that's an example, but then I would encourage you to generalize that all across the Clean Energy Ministerial agenda, that the unifying theme is that by these engagements and by the discussions that take place at the level of members of the respective cabinets, we are identifying ways that all of the participating countries can be more ambitious and more effective at implementing the INDCs that they have on the table today.
Hi there, thanks. My name is Sonia Suda. I'm a student here at SIPA. I just wanted to know if you could comment a little bit on the prospects or current efforts underway around carbon capture and sequestration.
So thank you for your question. This is a classic case of one of the places where the collaborations are incredibly important, especially because one needs to see the kinds of cost reductions that have occurred in other clean energy technologies. You need to see that happening in the carbon capture space in order to see the types of commercial penetration that many hope for. And oh, by the way, if you look at most of the projections of the potential roadmaps to a 2 degrees Celsius outcome on the climate change issue, I'm not aware of one that suggests that we can get to that kind of an outcome without having a significant share played by carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. Now, the particular challenge in the CCUS space is that you've got a combination of the need for lots of early stage research and development, then demonstrations at pilot stage, and then as time goes on and technological learnings occur, the scaling up. And so we need a lot of different types of engagements with partners on CCUS. We've got a lot of work that's underway on a bilateral basis with China in this space. There are a number of other countries that have chosen in the recent handful of years to opt out of the CCUS space, which is, of course, a choice to be made by each country as a sovereign matter, but which it increases the difficulty of reaching the kind of outcomes that we need. So not uncomplicated, lots of focus in a couple of different settings, then also some multilateral engagements like the Carbon Sequestration Leadership Forum, where we think that there may be some opportunities for progress as well. But, complicated play.
Do you know whether as part of the mission innovation increases in funding, whether governments are talking about increasing funding in CCUS?
I know that is certainly something that we contemplate on the U.S. side. I anticipate that other governments that are already playing, and this is the Norway and China and other such, would in all probability do so. It's their call to make independently, but I expect that the answer would be yes. What I don't know the answer to the question I don't know the answer to is whether some of the countries that have opted out of a more proactive engagement on CCUS in the last couple of years, citing budgetary constraint, whether increased budgets as called for under MI might change that picture somehow.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for the speech. I'm Shu Zhang from China. I'm visiting scholar of the Columbia Law School, make research on the climate change and the law of the sea. So I have two questions.
Four questions.
Two questions, yeah.
Two questions.
Okay. One question is you mentioned the international key partner, China, India, and Mexico. I'm curious why there is some cooperation or partner with the EU or Russia or Japan, such as developed countries. Is there any project or cooperation to reach the climate change target on the Paris Agreement? Because you only mentioned US and the developing countries. Yeah. The second question is, I note that there is a lot of cooperation between US and China. The research center plan a lot of meetings. But recently there is, the dispute, there is arise a lot of disputes on the control washers regarding the South China Sea issues. So my question is that from the perspective of policy making, will you consider the South China Sea issues, or are the energy issues and the South China Sea issues are totally separated? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll take your questions in reverse order, starting with the second one. There are various issues in the world that I'm happy that I don't have to attend to day to day, and the South China Sea is pretty high on that list. My lighthearted response should not be understood as saying that there are not points of controversy between the United States and China. There are, and we need to engage constructively with each other on those points of controversy and figure out ways forward. But I am very happy indeed that the focus that we look at from the Department of Energy in our engagements with China does not go to there. There are topics that pose challenges to our ability to work together as U.S. and China in the clean energy space. One example is the adequate protection of intellectual property. Now that's been an area that also has had significant controversy associated with it at points in the past. We have succeeded, I think, in starting to make progress, pragmatic, step-by-step progress, for example, through the provisions for technology management under the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center. It is a proof of the idea that if we focus on some of these hard issues, we can make progress. It's not a, pardon my Americanism, it's not a silver bullet. It's not a simple resolution of all difficulties, but it suggests that we can make progress, and that's the spirit in which we approach these engagements on clean energy with China. To your question about the identified key partners, again, I apologize. I very consciously did the risky thing of identifying 3 and ignoring, 100 and some others. Yes, we do have very deep engagements on these topics with countries that are in the European Union, with Japan, with the Republic of Korea, with Australia, with other partners all across the globe. So yes, and I don't wish for my identification of 3 partners to imply that others are unimportant. That is not how we feel.
Somasundaran from engineering school here. I have a dream, maybe it's a ridiculous question. Some countries use coal, some countries use oil, and so on and so forth. And some countries have disasters sometimes and power shortages. Is it ever possible to have an international grid which will distribute power all over? And I can even dream of something following the sun 24 hours and distributing to all the countries all the time. I know there are challenges, but I think one can dream of that and work towards that.
Thank you for your question. There are indeed some people that would wish to pursue that dream, and it is one of those ideas whose ambition is also breathtaking. I will say that there's a lot of established experience that demonstrates that there are benefits under the right circumstances to having interconnections, grid interconnections, that enable access to a variety of different sources of electricity at different times of day, different seasons, et cetera. But I go back to the question that was posed by one of the earlier questioners about net metering. And I raise that example because all of these technological and business model changes that are occurring in our electricity systems across the globe, there are very few things in our economic life, public economic life, that translate into greater sensitivity than how much my electricity costs, right? And that's true in lots and lots and lots of different settings all around the globe. So one shouldn't, I would say, one mustn't underestimate the huge sensitivity, political sensitivity, of very, very big new aspirational targets, and such as a global interconnection. That's even before you end up with having a conversation about proper cybersecurity, jurisdictional issues, what is the capital formation that is required for the building of such a grid, et cetera. So big dreams are sometimes good things. On the other hand, as a former boss of mine used to say, big visions, big hallucinations, not hugely dissimilar. So.
We need to start to wrap up, and I want to close on a kind of career-oriented question, but just a few specific questions that occurred to me as we were talking. You mentioned the Clean Power Plan, and there's obviously been legal uncertainty around that in the United States today. Do you hear about that as you travel around the world from your counterparts? And if so, what do you say to your counterparts about the Clean Power Plan?
I hear about that very frequently, second only to who will be the next president of the United States. I'm sure others in the room.
Can you answer both questions?
I cannot answer both questions. No, there's obviously a great deal of visibility to the Clean Power Plan. Most international partners in the clean energy and climate space, first of all, understand that the Clean Power Plan is a reflection of the peculiar moment that we are in our political economy, where there is a recognition that we need to address, well, there's a recognition among some that we need to address the climate problem, and to do so in a way that is both at scale and progressive over time, but that economy-wide answers up until the present time have been out of reach. And so the first point is that many of our international partners understand that the Clean Power Plan is important, but is also to be understood as a second best policy tool to be reached for. The typical question is whether the Supreme Court's decision to stay the implementation on a temporary basis of the Clean Power Plan represents the definitive ending of the Clean Power Plan. And as you will well appreciate, that is not the case. But the difference between a temporary action and a more enduring one is lost on many international partners. I believe that most, if not all, of our international partners in the clean energy and climate space are convinced that, I mean, if I turn around the statement that I made earlier about the United States and China collaborating in this space, if it is true that you can't get to success without the United States and China engaging and moving forward each, we have a part in that. We got to be part of that successful march forward. And what worries our partners, I think, the most is the suggestion that the interim decision by the Supreme Court foretells a later decision to stop the Clean Power Plan, removing, therefore, one of the most important elements of the President's Climate Action Plan.
We've had a very wide-ranging conversation. We actually have not had a chance to stop in either South America or Africa in our conversation. I don't want to leave, so I know you pay attention to issues all around the world, with at least some comments about the clean energy transition on both of those continents.
In both of those continents as diverse and massive as they are, you also see an increasing focus on how countries simultaneously deliver the economic development that they must develop, that they must provide to their populations, and the clean energy outcomes that are needed as well. We've had a number of different engagements, including a U.S.-Africa clean energy ministerial meeting a year and a half ago, which was so interesting because of the demand pull, if I might express it that way, from African energy ministers who were signaling to Secretary Moniz and others there assembled the importance of their providing the legal and regulatory structures that could be conducive to domestic, be it domestic from, to investment from domestic or from international sources. In terms of South America, we are, many of us, watching the political uncertainties that unfold in Brazil, and that is for Brazil to determine what the outcome of that story is. But Brazil has also signaled very strongly its desire to provide leadership in the clean energy and climate space. And now one sees with some of the transitions that are happening in the Southern Cone also some very pro-clean energy leadership coming from Chile and Argentina both, where we hope that we will have more engagements in the remainder of this calendar year.
All right, well, final question for the students in the audience. I'm sorry, we're out of time, but maybe catch John right after.
It's on that point exactly, though.
Okay, quick, because we say a two-finger intervention.
Right.
We say yes.
I mean, I didn't want actually to leave the audience the dream and hallucinations kind of context, and perhaps you would know, but there is a consortium in South America based in Chile. It's called the Solar Energy Research Center with academics partners in Brazil and Argentina, and they're talking about a network there, transmission, HVDC, that connects the Atacama Desert with Buenos Aires, Argentina, Rio, and Sao Paulo. And technologically, it's much easier than carbon sequestration, a lot easier. I mean, there is already a line that connects 2,000 kilometers from Peru, hydro, to Sao Paulo.
Yeah, no,
so the global networks, I think the global networks is not a hallucination. It is something technologically much easier, in my opinion, than safe geological carbon sequestration.
Okay.
So.
I know a number of the students in the audience would probably like me to ask you how did they get a job with the U.S. government, and you could answer that question if you want, but I wanted actually a slightly broader question, which is...
why would you get a government?
As as they think about setting out from a Columbia degree into a career, just any advice that you would give them? You've about 130 years ago had a Columbia degree, and then set out to obviously a very successful and career and one that's been, you've done a lot for our country and the world. So just any general thoughts about advice you might give them as they set out from Columbia?
I guess my advice would be go where your passion is. I don't mean the following as a swipe at Columbia, but I was not a happy graduate student when I was at Columbia. I was in a PhD program and came to the realization that I actually shouldn't be in that PhD program, much thanks to my advisor, who was a newly minted Columbia professor, who kind of, not literally, shook me by the lapels and said, but if you're not happy doing this, go where you are happy. Very, very simple advice, revolutionary to somebody who was trying to keep up with the 1,200 pages from the one class each week of reading. But again, I don't mean to be facile about this. It's easier to state than it is to dissect and pursue. But going where your passion is, I think, is always the most important thing.
Such great advice. Well, I've had the privilege of traveling down some of the same roads as John for many years, and I've had the occasion to see why so many people have such high regard for him in our government and around the world. So, John, thank you for joining us today.